criteria. They're talking about using colloquial language, what they're doing for the weekend, what they did yesterday, and so forth. So the academic vocabulary then becomes really important as it's reinforced through the word walls, because otherwise it will not be as easily reinforced in other areas. So you have to give them the most reinforcement as possible for that content area. So I told you that vocabulary knowledge is synonymous with building background. So the way the brain works is that we engage information in the working memory. From there, if it is not touched, it does not go into the permanent memory. It just sort of fades away. So the more times we engage the information as the information is stored in the working memory, it goes then into the permanent memory, which is what we want. A word wall is a way to do that, especially if it's interactive. Even surface level background knowledge is useful. Background knowledge manifests itself as vocabulary knowledge, which I just told you. So then, teaching vocabulary is synonymous with teaching background knowledge, because how many times do we say, well, it's because my students just don't have that background. They've never done this, they've never done that. Well, teaching vocabulary then has become synonymous with teaching background knowledge, and that's why it's so effective, and that's why it gives you so much bang for your buck. There are 3 types of vocabulary that we have to keep in mind. They're separated into tiers through language arts research. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Does anybody know the difference between the 3 tiers?
I know Tier 3 is the most content and academic and specific words.
Okay, good. Yes, it is. So Tier 3 is specific to content. Whether it's technical language, whether it's content language, that's your Tier 3. So if we use that knowledge, then what do you think your Tier 1 would be?
The bigs.
Your bigs. So your high frequency type words. Your Tier 2 are words that are in between. They are words that are characterized, characteristic, it should say. Words characteristic of mature language that have importance and utility. So it's not technical, yet it's not high frequency words. So words like consequence. It's not really technical, not really specific to just one area, yet it's not a high frequency word. So there are kind of words in between where the students may have heard of it, but really not know what it means. Yet, it's so important to understand academic text. It's important to understand tax and your achievement testing. Okay, so they're the in-between words. Tier 2 and Tier 3 are considered to be your academic words. Tier 1 is considered to be your high-frequency words. So when we talk about academic word walls, we're specifically targeting Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. Other types of examples of Tier 2 words are words like analyze, examine, characteristics. Do y'all get a feel for what those Tier 2 would be? Okay. Oh, I gave you the answer there. We're supposed to do an activity, but boy is an example of a Tier 1 word. Imperative is an example of a Tier 2 word. And cognate is an example of a Tier 3 word. Which campus was I at? Might have been both campuses where there was like a school-wide vocab.
It's both.
In both? Okay, so those are a lot of your Tier 2 words that are being targeted. Okay. They're not high frequency, and they're not specific to science or math or the medical field or legal field or teaching field and so forth.
So in order for the students to feel part of the school and what everybody else is doing, they should be doing those words in Spanish as well? That would be a good way to...
well, so you want to keep it specific to, for word walls?
For those words that you mentioned around the whole school. The school-wide world.
Well, ideally, yes, they'd be learning it in both languages. So the English teacher would make sure to review it in English, and then the Spanish teacher would make sure to review it in Spanish.
What I did is mention those words that were cognates, so the kids could make that connection. Because we work a lot with cognates in fourth grade. So, and I put them together when they were cognates. When they were not cognates, there were some of the words that we had that were not cognates. So I just put them with the same picture, but in different cards.
Right.
So they would know it's the same word, but they're not cognates. So they cannot be accessed by the cognate kind of highway.
Right.
So.
Okay, and cognate is, just to make sure everybody understands what a cognate is. What's a cognate?
A word that sounds and is spelled similarly in both languages that has the same
meaning. Okay, examples?
Dilemma.
Information.
Dilemma and dilemma. Information, información.
Familia, family.
Familia and family. Very good. We have partial cognates, false cognates, and true cognates. So your true cognates and your partial cognates are going to be the ones that are true to each other, and then your false cognates are going to be the ones
Embarrassed, I know.
that are totally not
That's the best one.
Hilarious pieces of writing of one of my students. He wanted to say fábrica, but he was writing one of those pieces for telepaths, and he wrote fabric in his paper as a factory. I was just laughing out loud, but when I was reading his paper, it was so funny.
Yes, we would definitely want to distinguish it because we can cause them to not be in a nice situation if we don't correct and give them that feedback. But certainly, and cognates are really, really powerful, especially for your academic word wall, because your academic words so many times come from those Greek and Latin roots, and so you're going to see a lot more cognates, and it's going to be more power to them because they'll be able to associate it with their native language if they know it in that language. Another thing I was going to say is, with the cognates, it is important, even though it seems so obvious to us that they're cognates, kids sometimes don't see it. You have to explicitly point it out and say, hey, información looks very similar to information. So it probably means the same thing most of the time, right? So what do you know about información and so forth. If you don't point it out, it's hard for them to see sometimes. So we can't assume that they can automatically see that. Okay, we went through that. So those are really the parameters of an academic word wall. You have to be conscious of what the academic words are. They should be aligned, of course, to your curriculum, to your lesson. They need to access it and interact with it so that the word becomes part of your permanent memory, not just staying in your working memory. And it's synonymous with building background. So then, I know that you have some high frequency words, which are also very important. We have academic words, which are also very important. So we need to make sure that we have a contingency of both types of words in the classroom. With your Spanish and your English, if you're in a self-contained classroom, of course you're going to have both Spanish and English. If you're in a situation separated by team teaching, your Spanish teacher is going to be faithful to the Spanish words and your English teacher is going to be faithful to the English words.
Annie, I have a question about that.
Yes.
I usually front-load vocabulary for my lessons, and the visual, I usually start with a visual, and then we will move into definitions if it's a science or math later on as the lesson progresses, so they can put together the definition and make sense. Should I address those definitions and vocabulary front-loading in both languages? Because I've been told that if today is a Spanish day, I should front-load just in Spanish.
Okay, well, you want to be faithful to whatever the language is going to be, whatever your lesson is, whatever language your lesson is going to be conducted in, right?
Yeah, but let's say I have a lesson that is 3 days long, or week long, like, for example, fractions in math. I will front-load the vocabulary in English on Monday. Okay?
Right.
We will continue to teach the same lesson using the words and reinforcing the use of the words through the content.
Correct.
But when it comes Wednesday, I'm not going to front-load the same words in Spanish.
No, not again, no. No, you will just make the transition and make the connection and say, remember we talked about this word, and this word in English or whatever your next language is información, and then continue spiraling the lesson.
So if, for example, if I'm using arrays and I start with arrays and then I move into matrices, then what I do is make the connection right there. When I said array on Monday, that meant matrices in Spanish.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do I do that specifically?
Yes. Beautiful.
Okay.
Beautiful. Yeah, you would.
Because I always made it through. I always front-load it in both languages.
Oh, okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
Right. I don't think that's necessary just because of what we know with second language acquisition and the transfer piece. You want to be able to use that to your advantage because you want to be able to save time too. You don't. I mean, gotta be a time saver. So we all know about transfer, okay? So when we transfer from one language to the other, they should be able to make that connection. You're gonna have to sometimes explicitly make it for them, but that is going to be a time saver piece because you're not gonna have time to teach, all the lessons in one language and then all the lessons in another language in the same day. I mean, you have to be able to spiral it continuously, right? Not repeat the lesson. So in that case, it would be the same thing.
It wasn't a repeat, it was just front-loaded the vocabulary.
Right,
Sometimes it takes a whole lesson
Right.
cycle.
No, you would only front load it in whatever language of instruction for that day or for that lesson is going to be.
Okay.
So how you mentioned it, it's beautiful. Okay. What time is it?
On the word wall. Oh,
Yes. Please.
At some point, you get too much up there. I mean,
Yes.
how do you deal with the cycling of words in and out so that you?
Okay, let's talk about that. So teachers do it different ways. They take it down. One of the really effective ways that I've seen is taking it down, putting it into your workstation or your center so that they can continuously spiral it and reinforce so they have some sort of activities with it, word games, and so forth. It would not be ideal to have a year's worth of vocabulary words. First of all, you don't have space. And secondly, it's not effective because the words start to get lost. So you don't want to do that. So that's really the best way that I've seen it. Any other ideas?
I just thought about this. If you put under your bulletin board or your smart board the letters A through Z, and then they say you're teaching dinosaurs and you teach all the vocabulary and you have it up there. Now you're going to move to plants. You can take it down, put it in the index card, in a ring, and on the D. And then when you do plant, you do it up there, then you take it down and you put it in the P. Now if they want to use the word teeth and they don't remember how to write it or spell it or say it, but they remember, oh, we did it on the dinosaur unit, so I'm going to go there and the word and the picture are there.
Perfect.
So I just copy it.
Yeah,
and it's right there
absolutely.
in the front of the room.
Perfect. Perfect. Any other questions about word walls?
I have a question.
Yes.
If we're gonna put it on we can put it on a chart by unit. Let's say we're doing math words. Should it be in English and then in Spanish on that same chart next to each other, or should it be, especially for us that we're self-contained, should it be this unit, math unit, in English and then the same words in a different chart in Spanish, or should they just be?
Well, ideally they should be separated in order to, because your situation is self-contained, so that's different. Ideally, it should be separated just for the consistency of strict separation of languages. Cognates would be one exception to that because you want to be able to show the relationship between the English and the Spanish together. So there's separate ways, and we can talk about what that's going to look like for you all. But the research shows that ideally it should be separated, with the exception of cognates. So we'll talk about. These are all kind of food for thought as you plan for next year, and as you start thinking about your classrooms for next year. Okay, to have a place for all of these pieces. Any other questions for word walls?
So, not really word walls, but environmental print. So, it's better, since we're doing separate English, Spanish, it's better to only have English in my classroom. Okay.
Yes, unless it's a cognate and your goal is to show the connection between.
Because I think there was some confusion at the beginning of the year.
Absolutely.
Because we did Gomez and Gomez training in the summer.
Right, so Gomez and Gomez says
Right.
to do both, yes.
So we have those. So for
Right.
next year, I'm not going to read
It
them
should
over
be,
now. But
it should be strict separation of languages. And and especially with the environmental print, because you're actually labeling the physical items, so they
they
know.
should be able to see it.
Yeah, they know that this is CJAM.
Okay.
Okay.
It's just you know. So I know that's characteristic of Gomez and Gomez, but the research shows that it should be strict separation of languages, except for cognates, to show the relationship. Any other questions?